Hello, and welcome to today's webinar, the Rural Clean Energy Federal Funding Fair for the Russ Electric Core Program Overview. Before we get started with today's content, we'd like to go over a few housekeeping items so you know how to interact with the Zoom platform. Attachments and messages from the panelists will be posted into the chat, and we would like you to all use the Q&A feature to enter any written questions or comments. And finally, if you need to leave at any moment, you may click the leave button. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Christopher McLean. He is our Assistant Administrator for the Rural Utilities Services Electric Programs. Chris?
All right, thank you very much. Appreciate the kind introduction. Welcome everybody to what is now the second installment of the USDA funding fair. And in this afternoon session, we're going to pay close attention to the RUS electric program, the Rural Electrification Act loan program that we have administered for over 87 years before we ever had the Inflation Reduction Act funding. And one thing, the tremendous, overwhelming response we received to the Inflation Reduction Act offerings at PACE and New Era made clear to us that there is a definite appetite for new sources of clean, affordable, reliable power by rural America. And so we wanted to make sure that folks had an opportunity to look at all the different funding options that are available, that particularly because our overwhelming demand for PACE and New Era means that we're going to have a lot of good projects that we're just going to run out of money for to be able to funding. So we don't want anyone to give up. So we've got an excellent program today. Our first speaker will be Joe Baden, who is from the Rural Utilities Service, and he is the head of our loan origination office. And then after Joe, we'll have a very special guest, Luke Bassett from the U.S. Department of Treasury. And Luke is going to give us a much anticipated rundown of how direct pay tax credits work as an incredible opportunity that sprang from the Inflation Reduction Act. And we're honored to have our colleague from the Department of Treasury, Luke, join us. So without further ado, it gives me great pleasure to introduce Joe Baden, the head of loan origination at the Rural Utility Service. Take it away, Joe.
Thank you, Chris, and thank you, everyone. As Chris said, I lead loan origination and approval, and I'll present our core program. I know many of you have put letters of interest to the IRA programs, both PACE and New Era, and I wanted to cover that a little with PACE. The letters of interest eligible scopes were renewable electricity generation with or without storage, and those were partially forgivable loans, and that eligible entities for that were developers as well as cooperatives. The other New Era, it was only for co-ops, and we know this was greatly oversubscribed, and as Chris said, we asked folks to dream big. We couldn't select everything there, but that doesn't mean the story ends at that point. We have our core program, which is very well funded, and I wanted to go over the menu of core programs that can still provide financial assistance to help you realize these projects and actually get these benefits out in rural America. So let's go to the next slide. And just to give you an idea of what our core program is, as Chris said, it goes back more than 80 plus years. And our mission, we're a very mission-oriented organization, is to finance the construction, electric distribution, transmission, and generation facilities, including system improvements and replacements, to get affordable, accessible, reliable electricity out to rural areas. And this has been our mission since the beginning, and we continue to provide that mission. And as you can tell from the loans and the pent-up demand, there's still demand for us to deliver this mission. And you can see our core program is a bit broader than what the scopes of PACE and New Era were. So more than likely what was not funded in those programs may be eligible for different programs within our core, and I'll be going over that. I do want to say about 16 years ago, we expanded our program offerings to project developers and project loans for renewable energy projects that have PPAs with rural electric utilities, with the purpose to diversify the supply portfolio of rural electric providers, electricity providers. I also provided the electric program link here. Next slide. This is the key to my presentation. There'll be more details, but this is the high-level menu, if you will, of what the RUS Electric Core programs offer. We typically are funded around the level of about $5.5 billion a year. We usually obligate pretty much most of that, if not all. We had a record year last year. So even these programs are in demand, but let me go through each one by one and let you know what the options are, what you may be eligible for. And again, this is on a high level. If there is some interest, we can definitely have follow-up emails and conversations to get to the details of how to go about these types of loans and financial assistance. So the first and traditional loan is our rural utility system infrastructure loans, and that's available to cooperatives and utilities, basically any electric supplier that has rate-making capability and is a utility, has a system of generating transmission or distribution assets. These are typically large G&T, generation and transmission co-ops, and distribution co-ops. Others are munis and other suppliers to rural America. What's key about this system loan is the interest rate for renewable or clean energy projects is the Treasury, long-term Treasury rate. There's no additional fees. Non-renewable projects have an interest rate of the Federal Financing Bank, which is typically Treasury plus 1/8 of 1%. We can go have a loan term up to 35 years or the weighted average useful life of the assets in the loan. And the security for the loan is RUS having a first position or a shared first position on a mortgage, indenture, or a pledge of revenue in the case of municipals and other entities that we can't secure with the property. But with a system loan, the mortgage or indenture includes not just the projects, but all assets in the system. And again, qualified projects can be generation assets, transmission and distribution assets, typical utility plants. We've expanded to also include smart grid and smart utility assets, as well as some others that I'll go into a little later. But this is our typical loan. Cooperative or a muni would do this through a construction work plan. All projects that I'll talk about have to go through a NEPA review and get cleared before construction can begin. And that's pretty much with any federal program. But this is our typical system loan. So if a co-op has a renewable project that they're going to own, make part of their total utility plant, they can come in as a system borrower. and work with our general field reps. We have general field representatives. These are our U.S. employees that represent every state in our country. And that's pretty much our key core program. Now, for developers and co-ops that are not current borrowers of ours, they can qualify for renewable energy project loans. And a project loan is for a renewable energy project. It could have storage or not. And those projects must have a long-term power purchase agreement with an electric utility that serves rural areas. And we will determine a rural determination of what's eligible in terms of the scope of what RUS can finance. The key to this is our low-cost financing enables a lower PPA price that will benefit rural end users. And the term of this loan is up to the PPA term or the useful life of the project assets, whichever is less. And these projects must be commercial technology, also get cleared through a NEPA review, and meet financial ratios. And with all our loans, all projects must comply with the Buy America Act. So Buy America is also key. We have loan security for project loans, which include a lien or a mortgage, as I said, a first position on the project assets only. They'll requirement for cash reserves, usually equivalent to 1 year of debt payment, 1 year of O&M, and if there's leased land, 1 year of land lease payments. We require at least 25% equity, and if needed, a guarantor agreement from either an investor or a parent company. These project loans are given to the project company, not a parent or holding company, and must be adequately secured for RUS loans and show that they pencil out for the likelihood to repay these loans. The difference between the PACE loans and the project loans, basically it goes through the same underwriting, but there is no forgivable component to our core project loans. And that's the basics. We have two other offerings. We have the Rural Energy Savings Program, or RESP. And with this program, it's a relending program, and it allows RUS to reach to the customer side of the meter, because the prior two system and project loans are on the utility side of the meter. RESP allows utility co-op to get money for energy efficiency measures from RUS at 0% interest, and we allow them to relend it for up to 5% and get it repaid via on-bill financing. So if a co-op or a rural serving utility has a market plan for energy efficiency measures on the customer side of the meter, they can put together a plan, put together a RESP application, and we can relend to them at those conditions. And I have a bit further slides later on about how RESP works, so stay tuned for that. And then the only grant portion of our core program that we have is the high energy cost grants. And that is a competitively awarded program. It's for poverty areas with low income and high energy costs. Typically, we define high energy costs as 275% of the national average of energy costs. And that doesn't have to be just electricity. That's any energy cost, and that's defined. Typically, we get about $8 to $10 million per year, and the awardees tend to be in Alaska, Hawaii, Pacific, territories, and tribal entities. So this is kind of your general menu of what we offer in the core. Let's go to the next slide. Yeah, as promised, here's a bit more information on our RESP program. As I said, it's relending for customer side of the meter, 0% to eligible utilities, green banks, others, and can relend to their customers for on-bill repayment at no more than 5%. And these are some typical energy efficiency measures that will be eligible. And what I'd want to point out is on-grid or off-grid renewables can be financed this way on your customer sites, and electric vehicle charging stations. Now, for system and project loans, we can do electric vehicle charging stations if they're part of the utility assets. If they're owned by the utility, they can be part of a system loan. If they're owned by the customers, it would have to be financed through RESP. And the other feature of RESP is we can do whole manufacturer home replacements, because typically when those homes get old, it's not economic to retrofit them. They must be just replaced with newer, more efficient manufactured homes. And that could be financed through RESP. And let's go to the next slide. Also, we want to announce our newest division. We're always evolving to meet the needs of the marketplace out there. And we know that grid security is a big issue with utilities, especially those serving rural areas. We've set up a grid security division, and we can, through all these loan options, finance grid security, cybersecurity, physical security, and fire prevention. Some grid security measures that may be eligible include, as you can see, emergency vehicles, software, vegetation management, drones, and security systems. So we can do all this. We can do smart grid. 10% of our system loans can be also for fiber drops for broadband. So we can do fiber for backbone applications, as well as a limited application for broadband or fiber to the premises. So it's pretty broad, but well-defined in terms of the eligible purposes. And with that, next slide. Here's some other funding options. As I said, our next speaker will talk about tax incentives, direct pay. As a summary, covered the system loans and project loans, RESP. Earlier today and next time, REAP also gave a presentation. There may be U.S. tribal programs and other programs at EPA and DOE. Of course, I know DOE has the Energy for Rural Areas ERA, as well as other programs in their clean energy demonstration programs. And then I have a set of links to the right that were also provided in the chat that are kind of keys to the USDA kingdom of all the notices of opportunities, programs, resources, data, and other information to keep you up to date, to see what other programs beyond the electric program is available to you, and what you may qualify for, or what their requirements are. And next slide. This is the second funding fair webinar today. Also, April 9th, we'll be doing 2 more. And just stay tuned for more information for April 9th. Next slide. And I just want to thank you. Here's my contact information if you have any other questions. And I'll send it back to Chris. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Joe. And that's Willie Wirehand, for those of you who don't know that, the mascot of rural electric cooperatives. Well, next up, we have Luke Bassett. Thank you so much for joining us, Luke. And Luke's going to talk about direct pay tax benefits from the U.S. Department of Treasury, complements of the Inflation Reduction Act. So take it away, Luke.
Thanks, Chris, and thanks everyone for inviting me. Just as way of background, I'm from a rural area in West Virginia and was a member of 4-H. And so even though I work at the Department of Treasury, which doesn't often translate to the same programs that USDA works on, I do think a lot about rural development, and I'm really happy to join you today and talk about direct pay. So I'm going to share my screen and hopefully get started. So the Inflation Reduction Act elective pay final rule just came out. Treasury and the IRS have been working on it for a while, and it came out last week. So this is very new information, and we're excited to share it with you. One piece that I need to say at the outset is Treasury does not provide tax guidance or tax advice. So all of the information that I'm going to share is pretty general, and it is meant to provide information and show you the resources that we have available for the entire American public about the guidance. But it's really important to note that it's always best to go back to tax guidance, and if you're able to contact a tax advisor so that you can get the right details as you think through planning your projects, planning project finance, and then ultimately filing for the tax incentives in the Inflation Reduction Act. So I'm going to walk through both the overview of elective pay, the final regulations that came out on the 5th last week, an additional piece on a proposed rule that was focused on co-ownership and some applicability that we'll get to in just a moment. There is a comment period that will start, actually it started on the 11th when it was posted. So that proposed rule we'll get to. And then finally, I want to touch on how folks actually go into energy credits online, which is the IRS's portal for accessing elective pay and transferability, and ultimately also electric vehicle credits. But it's our portal to access the credits and pre-register, pre-filing registration, and move forward with the process. So we'll get to that piece as well. So I'm just going to very briefly touch on this. The Inflation Reduction Act is a huge investment in the economy, and I think specific to this audience, it's a big investment in the rural economy. And I think it's important to note, I worked in the Senate on the law for Senator Manchin, and part of the thinking about elective pay or direct pay is really reflecting the role that rural utilities have played in American history, empowering rural economies, and their historic lack of access to tax incentives. And so you all played a big part in helping shape what is now this really incredible tool that we have for opening up the tax incentives for all of the clean energy, well, 12 of the clean energy credits to communities all across the United States. So thank you for your role in helping that move forward. So elective pay, with it, and just a little clarification, we use elective pay. The word elective refers to the choice, the option of choosing it. Most people on the outside refer to it as direct pay, so I may use those terms interoperably, but elective pay, with it, tax-exempt and governmental entities that don't owe federal income taxes are for the first time available to receive a payment equal to the full value of the tax credit for building clean energy projects that qualify or making those investments. This system differs from the grant and loan programs that rural utility service runs that Joe just walked through, because it is in the tax code, it isn't a process where applicants apply and then receive an award. It requires planning, and it's also, it requires the step of filing and receiving the tax credit, again, after the project is placed in service, after the requirements have been met. But again, it is a cash payment for that value of the tax credit. So it's really an incredible tool. But again, want to underscore the focus on planning and thinking ahead to the 12 clean energy tax credits that are accessible through direct pay. And just as an update, so far, as of last week, we've seen about 450 projects that are in the registration portal for pre-filing. And so we're starting to see eligible entities, tax exempt organizations, state and local governments think through how to do this. And we hope to share more examples of that going forward. And, you know, I think that we're eager to work with you all and hear your stories about your ability to access this important tax mechanism. So the 12 credits, this is the important part. There are several familiar credits that have been sort of the foundational parts of investment in clean energy in the power sector, but also credits that you may be familiar with if you're thinking through how your nuclear fleet works, how you may want to use carbon capture, utilization, and storage. I won't walk through each and every one of these tax credits, but for the most part, the 12, you see 7 here at the moment, but the 12 credits span electricity generation, carbon capture. They also touch on manufacturing, vehicles, and fueling systems, fueling including electrification of EV charging stations, and then on fuels themselves, such as clean hydrogen production and clean fuel production. So in each case, I think you can see how pieces touch the rural economy, whether that's local manufacturing, agriculture feeding into feedstocks for a number of the clean fuels, or even clean hydrogen or carbon capture. And across the board, I think the span of the 12 credits has a lot of relevance to projects that you all may be thinking through or working on. So there's a lot of accessibility, especially in the rural economy, for actors to think through projects that they're already developing, looking to place into service, and then add on this element of how the projects qualify, and then can access direct pay to receive that tax benefit at the end. There are a few cross-cutting elements that are important to note. In many of the credits, if the projects meet or the investments meet prevailing wage and apprenticeship requirements, meaning they are paying workers on the construction side and a prevailing wage for the location of the project, meeting apprenticeship requirements, which refers to reaching out and hiring apprentices from registered apprenticeship programs. Both of those factors, there's a lot of information on the Department of Labor's website or through the Department of Labor about meeting those requirements. Meeting the prevailing wage and apprenticeship piece, though, increases the credit from a base credit, usually of 6% in the investment tax credit case, by 5 times. So it goes from 6% up to 30%. Again, additional bonuses when you meet domestic content requirements. If your project is located in an energy community, this reflects communities that have historically been working on fossil fuels, whether that's communities where coal mines or coal power plants have closed, or in some cases where brownfield sites exist, or in other cases where the local economy has had a high percentage of employment in fossil fuels, but has seen an economic downturn and has high unemployment rates. So across the board, with the energy communities, that is an additional 10% bonus if you are locating a project there. And then separately, the low-income communities bonus program, that is an allocated credit. So that means a certain amount of money or a certain amount of capacity in this case. So a generation capacity is set aside each year. And through an application process, low-income communities apply, tribal lands and federal housing projects also are eligible entities, and they apply, and through the process may receive an additional 10% or even 20% bonus to add to the tax credit and build those projects in certain communities. So again, those are the sort of cross-cutting pieces. And again, these are adders that once you plan through your project and think that you're going to file for direct pay, if your project's located in an energy community, if it's met domestic content requirements, those additional bonus credits also qualify for direct pay. So there are a few notes just on the final rule that came out last week. One of which is especially important. We had a process. I'm happy to follow up with folks on more about our process, but we take the rulemaking process really seriously and really appreciate, just to jump ahead to the proposed aspect of this, we really appreciate written comments. So look forward to seeing those from you. Just on the final rule, one piece of it, to jump through this list, the applicable entity language was further clarified in the final rule as opposed to, or in addition to what was put out earlier in the proposed rule. And I think the thing to draw your attention to is the clarification around rural electric cooperatives. Namely, the final rule clarifies that tax exempt and taxable rural co-ops are eligible. So both sets, this is an important piece because it covers, again, rural electric cooperatives in a broader sense, clarifies that language. And we want to make sure that you understand that there's a lot of pathways toward direct pay and receiving these incentives. It also, the final rule also clarified some details about the pre-filing registration, the steps in the process, and using the portal. I'm going to go ahead and move past this, but I think an important point to make about the pre-filing registration is there are steps to it. Yes, it is an important feature because we're also trying to manage and protect against, safeguard against fraud and improper payments, so that there aren't bad actors that sort of take away the benefit of these programs and tax incentives from the rest of taxpayers. There was an element clarified about the tax year for entities without a filing obligation. For the most part, the examples that we've been using, and I'll jump ahead to the example, is the entities that have no federal income tax return requirement would file after putting the credit property in service. They complete the pre-filing registration and they choose a calendar year to adopt for purposes of direct pay. So again, if you haven't filed and you in 2022 and you put a project into service, you choose your filing year in the pre-registration part, and then it processes through. There were also a few more rules that are somewhat important, but more in the details of when you are putting projects into service using grants and forgivable loans. This is opening up how to stack financing or combine grants and loans. And I think throughout all of this, there's a lot of information, again, in the guidance, but I think it's important to note that there is flexibility in how you think through the projects if you're using grants, loans, and other pieces to again think through and add on the tax credit, tax incentive piece through direct pay, because it is blendable. We're trying to ensure that entities who are pursuing direct pay understand that, granted, the amounts can't exceed the cost of the investment, just in the basic math fairness of all of this, but it's important to note that it is possible to add these pieces together. I think just to walk through one of these examples that is maybe most relevant to this audience. Granted, this is using the example of a higher ed institution, but if you look with me through example number 2, Section 48 ITC is the investment tax credit for renewable energy. You all may be familiar with it, but if a tax exempt entity receives a grant for, let's say, $2 million to install a solar farm, the solar farm in total is $10 million. Using the grant, the institution then uses its own $8 million to complete the solar farm. It's still eligible under the 48 ITC or investment tax credit. That credit's basis, again, going back to the prevailing wage notion, is 6% if it's met the prevailing wage and apprenticeship requirements, and it's also located in an energy community, which again is that 10% bonus credit, then the entire credit rate is enhanced up to 40% in this case. Given that the basis of this on the solar farm for the higher ed institution is $10 million, the institution's ITC credit is $4 million. And since the amount of the restricted tax exempt grant plus the amount of the credit, $6 million, is less than the cost of the solar farm, the institution's ITC credit is not reduced due to the grant. So that's part of the accounting math of, again, combining and planning for loans, forgivable loans, grants, and how that then is reflected in the amount of the tax credits. I'm going to briefly touch on the proposed rule. In part, we are now in a phase of collecting written comments. So again, welcome that from all of you. The quick version of this, I think, is best portrayed in the graphic on the right of this slide. In the law, partnerships are not applicable entities. Instead, it names rural co-ops, tax-exempt organizations, other entities such as the Tennessee Valley Authority and so on, but it doesn't name partnerships. And so partners in the partnership can't receive elective payments on their share, even if one of the partners is a tax-exempt entity. So both the proposed and final rules permit an applicable entity, again, such as a rural co-op, that co-owns applicable credit property, such as a geothermal power plant, through a joint ownership arrangement that elects out of the partnership tax treatment. So it elects out of what is called subchapter K in the tax code to make an elective payment for the eligible credits for its share of the credit property. So looking at the graphic, if the partnership owns 100% of the project, the tax-exempt entity would elect out of partnership tax treatment and then be eligible for elective pay. That's what's in the proposed rule. We are currently in a notice of proposed rulemaking. It would, it is currently in the Federal Register. We are in a written comment period, I believe through, it's a 60-day period, and I believe it started on the 11th. So we look forward to your written comments. I'm going to go ahead through and can follow up with questions on that just in the interest of time. And so finally, I want to get to energy credits online and the process to claim them. So to go back to the beginning, I think as you all have thought through projects that you would like to build, pursuing direct pay first initiates with pursuing and completing that project, placing it into service, and understanding the financial planning that goes into that. Then once you determine your tax year, and again, that goes back to ensuring in this first part of the program, if you have not filed before as a tax exempt organization, that you determine the tax year so that once the project is placed into service and you're in the process of this pre-filing registration, that gets clarified on the front end. You then go to the Energy Credits Online and complete the pre-filing registration with the IRS for the credit. That requires information, including which credits you're pursuing, a lot of the tax return information, so that then the IRS can provide you with the registration number for all of the projects and go through its initial process of preparing for you to register and then file for the project in your tax return by the actual tax return due date. Then, after that is processed by the IRS, you receive the cash payment for the amount of the tax incentive. Just to move through the timeline, I think each eligible entity in the tax exempt space, including rural co-ops, have at times different timelines for filing and different deadlines. But I think to go ahead to what the Energy Credits Online portal looks like, we wanted to include some screenshots so that you have a sense of what to look for and what the steps will be like. There is an entire user guide and video tutorial, and the IRS also offers office hours to walk through how to use the portal. So please keep that in mind. But first, you have to create a clean energy business account for your organization. And you begin that process again on irs.gov or Energy Credits Online. The user guide details all of this. To hit on the high points, you identify the registrant type, provide basic information that will come as no surprise, address, banking information, information about the returns and the credits you're pursuing. Again, this shows the diversity of credits that are eligible for direct pay. It does require some documentation about the project, the property that you're pursuing, and the incentive that you're pursuing, all of which is part of the portal to upload. It is working well, and it allows you to save your work so you don't lose it as you go forward. And then finally, once all of that information is submitted, the IRS is estimating around 120 days in terms of providing feedback in the registration number. Just in terms of processing on their end, the different steps that they have to take for the pre-filing registration. I named the 120 days to give you that heads up on timing so that you can plan ahead for that piece as well. And just in closing, I want to touch on a few of the existing resources that we have, both on irs.gov, the Department of Energy's website about direct pay, and the White House also has a website. One website that has not made this list, but I want to just note that Treasury has launched its own Inflation Reduction Act website. It also has information on direct pay and will be adding more information in the weeks going forward. But I welcome you to visit any of those sites, and we do welcome questions. I won't really be able to respond if your question is, does my project qualify for a specific tax credit? But in general, we want to be helpful and a resource. So please either add questions in the Q&A box during the webinar, or feel free to reach out to me or my colleagues. Thanks very much for all of this.
All right, thank you very much, Luke. Very, very informative and helpful and timely, a real game changer when it comes to financing clean energy projects in rural America. We do have a very good question here in the chat. Are production tax credits per kilowatt or per kilowatt hour?
So the production tax credits, first, just to be clear on production tax credits writ large, they can be for many different things. So there are some manufacturing, fuels, hydrogen, other production tax credits. In the electricity space, it is a kilowatt hour, so it's generation based. Kilowatt refers to capacity,
Right.
and that's usually a metric associated with project development that is relevant, but is more associated with the investment tax credits. So it's the investment tax credit focuses more on the amount of the investment, so the dollar amount associated with a project. But in general, that ties at times a bit more closely to generation capacity, and the production is truly based on the generation of a given project. So I hope that helps clarify. Not an electrician or electrical engineer, but I hope that gets close to what you're asking.
I think you gave a very clear answer, and that works great. Next question has to do with the Rural Energy Savings Program. So would the Rural Energy Savings Program require credit checks, or how do consumers qualify for relending? Well, I will take that one. So Rural Energy Savings Program is a relending program. So RUS will make a 0% interest loan to a utility or utility-like entity to relend to a consumer. And that consumer can be a residential consumer, industrial, business, educational, and any kind of commercial ratepayer. But it is up to the utility, the RUS borrower, to be able to set up the energy efficiency program that they seek. And we have a whole menu of large number of eligible projects. So the essential elements is for RUS to lend at 0% to our borrower, again, the utility or utility-like energy efficiency entity, then our borrower, the utility, would then relend to the consumer at an interest rate no more than 5%. The consumer then must repay the utility through an on-bill financing mechanism. And there are three basic on-bill financing mechanisms that would qualify. So one, as your question would imply, it could be consumer lending, where the utility is qualifying the consumers for amount of credit to be able to pay back the loan, again, basically on an installment basis using the on-bill financing mechanism. The other method, which has been very popular, is called tariff financing. So the utility would set a tariff that would be basically an energy efficiency tariff, and that tariff would stay attached to the meter for as long as the repayment period requires. And so that would just be the new rate that the consumer would be able to pay on their electric bill. The advantage to tariff financing over loan financing is you don't have to necessarily qualify the ratepayer, and if the house or building or business transfers ownership, that rate stays with the meter and would be continued to pay by the new owner or new renter or new business owner. So then the third method of on-bill financing would be PACE financing, which like a utility would use property tax financing to be able to have basically an on-bill financing mechanism. So we basically have three choices. So it's not required that consumers qualify with a credit check and you wouldn't need to do that if you did it through the tariff mechanism, but it is actually a good, I mean, if you do a loan, it is of course good lending practice to make sure that your borrower can pay you back. The next question I will throw to Joe has to do with the core program. Would eligibility for the core loan be denied for a developer whose cooperative utility withdrew from PURPA? So Joe,
Yeah,
you want to
yeah,
take a shot at that?
oh yeah. The projects do not have to be qualified facilities or are required to follow an avoided cost schedule. It could be just a bilaterally agreed upon price schedule for the term of the loan between the developer and the offtake utility. The key that RUS is looking for is certainty in future revenue streams for the long-range financial forecast and for financial feasibility purposes. So as long as the project developer and the utility have an agreed upon schedule within the PPA for a long-term basis, we're okay. PURPA qualification or qualified facility is not really an issue for us.
Yeah, I think this is a very key point, Joe, that power purchase agreement serves two purposes for us at RUS. One, it's critical to our loan security, because we all know used renewable equipment, it doesn't have a lot of asset value. It is actually the ability to earn revenues. So the useful life of the equipment, the leasehold for if you're leasing land where the renewable project is, or the length of the PPA, or a maximum of 35 years, whichever is shorter, is what's going to drive the loan term for RUS. So the PPA is very important for us in the context of being able to establish loan security. So if you had a 10-year power purchase agreement, your loan will be within maybe a year or two of that 10-year period. If you had a 20-year PPA, might have a longer useful life, a longer loan term. Now, the other purpose of a power purchase agreement is it helps us as RUS identify who the beneficiaries are of the power, which is one of the requirements of our statute. So a power purchase agreement helps us figure out who is going to benefit from this power contractually, at least. And so we want to make sure that there are eligible rural entities that are benefiting from the power.
Right. I'll just say one thing from that, Chris. The rural determination is based on the rural character of your off-takers, not the location of your plant.
That's right.
The location of the project is germane to the NEPA review, but not to the rural eligibility. So the PPAs must be there. We do not fund merchant plants or plants that the output goes on the general, like MISO or ERCOT. There's no rural beneficiary that can be identified in those cases, and merchant plants tend to be a price taker. We need a firm PPA that's a price maker. So we're comfortable with those risks involved with the revenue.
Now, the Rural Energy for America program has slightly different rules than we do at RUS. And I don't know if that came up in today's discussion. But we are fairly strict on that PPA requirement. We have a great question here for Luke, and we'll see if Luke is able to answer this. But I work for an electric co-op, and we may have an eligible project that was completed in 2023. Can we apply for a refundable credit, or does the credit option not start until 2024?
Hi, so I think the answer is first, just going to the guidance to think through and ensure that the project qualifies, and then if it is placed in service, so that's a key feature. If it is operational, started working, whatever the project, there are a few different eligible types. So just as a hypothetical, if this is an electricity generation project, if it was turned on in the past year, elective pay is based on the past filing year and going forward. So it's based on the date of enactment of the Inflation Reduction Act. So I can't say whether a specific project or not is eligible, but I think in terms of the timeline, we are in a window of eligibility for elective pay projects writ large, if they're qualifying and if the project owner is an eligible entity. So I hope that helps clarify it in terms of the timeline.
Well, thank you, Luke, because for RUS, all we would be able to say is consult your tax advisor. So
yeah, I mean, that's key as well.
yes.
But yeah, it as far as the date goes, again, like it's most important to ensure that the project details match eligibility, but the year is just part of the law being enacted.
And the law was enacted in August of 2022.
Yeah, that's right.
All right, really good questions. Let's see. If anyone else has any questions, feel free to raise your hand or put them in the chat. Oh, I see one popping up here. Let's see. A power generator participating as a community solar provider would need to identify the tariff and the associated PPA, correct? Okay, so Armin, I assume your question is directed to the discussion we just had with Joe about how power purchase agreements are in place, or is maybe add some clarification, or whether we're talking about the tariff related to the consumer in rural energy savings program.
Yes,
And
you are
Chris,
correct.
I've enabled Armin's mic so you can ask him directly.
Yes, that is correct.
So it is for the rural energy savings program?
Yes.
Okay, so I think Armin, I think it's a good idea for you to have a little conversation, so I can really have clarity on this. The tariff, you have to be in a state that allows tariffing. Not every state does that. A lot of them do, to facilitate the on-bill financing. And so on a community solar, we would have to be able to identify the community owners of that solar facility, right? Because we have to have, for the rural energy savings program, that two-step process. They have to have basically the loan from us to our borrower, and then our borrower, again, presumably in your case, to the community solar project, which would be owned by the community so that we can show the consumer benefits. But I would recommend that you maybe get in touch with us, send us an email. My colleague, Bob Coates, of the Rural Energy Savings Program, has seen every different permutation, and we'll be glad to visit with you. But the thing to remember about Rural Energy Savings Program is it's got to be a two-hop. So from us to our borrower to a consumer, the consumer back to our borrower to us, and then the consumer has to have an on-bill financing mechanism to be able to support that payment. Now, we can finance smaller, we can finance what some people would describe as community solar, because that's always kind of a tricky term too, in our core program. And there we would want the community solar project to have a PPA with the eligible off-takers to be able to prove financial viability and eligibility for that project. So please give us an email. You can start with me, Christopher.McLean@USDA.gov. I'll put you in touch with Bob Coates and we can dig deeper into your question.
Thank you.
All right. Well, it looks like we have hit the bottom of the hour here, and don't see any hands up, and I just want to thank everybody for participating, and a big special thank you to Luke from the Department of Treasury, and Joe Baden, my colleague at Rural Utility Service, and of course, our great team at the Innovation Center, Maggie and Alexandria and everybody else who's worked so hard to put this project together. Stay tuned. There will be more funding fair announcements coming up in April. So we appreciate your participation. Have a great day, everyone. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.